Hello and welcome to a special edition report of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, carried on the Star-Com radio network. I'm your host, Brenton Lengel. I'm a poet, I'm a playwright, an activist with Occupy Wall Street and the Youth International Party, and I'm an anarchist. Insurrection is the only radio show that gives you all of the seditious information that you need to function in today's increasingly crazy world. And in this special edition video of Insurrection, I will be interviewing Cecily McMillan, the young woman who, while celebrating St. Patrick's Day with Occupy Wall Street, was beaten and arrested by the NYPD and later charged with and convicted of the crime of assaulting a police officer. The New York State DA's office, and especially Assistant DA Aaron Choi, maintain that Cecily is a violent and manipulative young woman, a publicity-crazed millennial who purposefully assaulted an NYPD officer as part of a gambit to become the, quote, leader of the Occupy Wall Street movement and promote her radical anti-government agenda. But Cecily, along with her defense team and thousands of supporters, maintain a very different story, that this was all a terrible accident, which occurred as a result of the NYPD officer Grantley Bovell sexually assaulting Cecily by grabbing her breast from behind. Officer Bovell has a history of police misconduct, and his alleged assault left a visible handprint, bruised, just above Cecily's breast. Nonetheless, after an intense month-long trial overseen by Judge Ronald Zweibel, known to some members of the legal community as, quote, a prosecutor in a robe, a jury of her peers convicted Cecily of a charge which regularly carries with it a sentence of 2 to 7 years in federal penitentiary. But the story doesn't end there. After leaving the court, members of the jury were finally able to research the case and were horrified to learn just how serious of a charge Cecily had been convicted of. They had thought she would only receive probation and maybe community service, but now learning the truth, in a crisis of conscience, one juror, who had been the single dissenting member, drafted a letter to Judge Ronald Zweibel asking for leniency, signed by himself and 8 other jurors, and as a result of that, along with an unprecedented letter-writing and petition campaign from Cecily's supporters, the DA's office recommended only a 90-day sentence for the young activist, and Judge Ronald Zweibel complied. Later, he revealed to the New York Post that he was extremely angry at being unable to sentence Cecily more harshly, and the head of the police union echoed his sentiments, calling for maximum punishment for anyone who assaults a police officer, no matter how minor the injuries sustained may be. So who's right? Is Cecily a scheming, violent individual who purposefully attacked Grantley Bovell, risking life, limb, and freedom for a chance in the spotlight? Or is Cecily, in fact, one of the least radical and most reform-minded voices of the Occupy movement, with a reputation as, quote, the queen of nonviolence, as one defense witness testified to? With this in mind, I entered Rikers Island Penitentiary, armed only with a voice recorder and 2 handheld cameras, to have the first recorded video interview with Cecily McMillan, post-trial and behind bars. And here it is. Let's see everything. So, Cecily, you have now been in Rikers almost for your entire sentence.
Yes, 13 days today, yes.
Excellent. And you will be, so you're going to be getting out at the end of this month. Sort of, I think the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, well, first off, how are you, and how has the experience been so far?
I'll be getting out at the beginning of next month.
Next month, I'm sorry.
But, I mean, generally speaking, I'm fine. Like I have explained before, I really took 2 years to really prepare for myself this experience, what this experience would look like. My brother has spent most of his life in and out of jail, or most of his adult life since he's 18. I have people that I write to that are facing up to back-to-back life sentences. So really did my research, and I prepared really seriously and emotionally and physically for this experience. So that being said, it has been an experience. I will say that it's not exactly like you think it would be. My biggest qualms are with the healthcare and the mental health care programs here, and very specifically the addiction programs they offer here, that treat addiction sort of like a bad choice, without any sort of structural analysis or any broad analysis of what these women face. I would say that in terms of the COs, to be completely frank, some of them, I would say even a few of them that I've worked with have more humanity than I could ever have with the conditions that they work in here and within the structure of this place. For all intents and purposes, they are in here as prisoners, just like we are. You know, they get yelled at, screamed at by captains. They work up to 16-hour shifts back to back, sometimes going home for 8 and coming back for another. They are put one to a room for up to 50 women, where they're required to watch not only the dormitory, but the day room and the bathroom. If you think about things in context of all your windpipe needs to be is restricted for 3 minutes before you're dead. Can you imagine watching 50 grown adults in a bathroom, in a day room, in a dormitory by yourself for 16 hours straight?
Well, I can't imagine that at this moment, but I think it definitely speaks to, I suppose, a certain amount of understaffing. So what I wanted to really get into with you, we did the initial interview, the 15 minutes over the phone. Since that time, I'm wondering, what is your perspective on your sentence? Do you feel that any part of it was valid, or do you feel that at this point that, you know, the obvious miscarriage of justice is...
Absolutely not. I feel like in terms of my sentencing, I think it's very clear that the judge really edited out his own narrative of what occurred that night, completely in line with the prosecutor, Choi and Strain. I think that the jury was never even given an opportunity to carry through justice, really to make a decision. They worked out the information that they were given, albeit with question. I'm still concerned what people think a felony means in terms of jail sentencing. Like, felon normally means jail. I guess I feel like I was remanded here without bail, despite making every single one of my court dates for more than 2 years, including missing my grandmother's death and her funeral, missing ample opportunities to go abroad for school, at the expense of my friendships, my relationships, missed school, and was somehow considered a flight risk. Yet I got my probation assignment yesterday, and I'm not even required to report to a human being, but a kiosk, because, quote unquote, I have been determined not to be at all a flight risk. Additionally, I think that there's ample evidence coming from all sorts of non-institutional and institutional outlets, from the president of the new school, which is a pretty corporate school, that I have not only not been violent in my course of politics there, even through an occupation, but I had helped facilitate a non-violent transition of that occupation. I think that the jurors came out and were flabbergasted that I would do any jail time. It seems to me very clear that the intent here was to shut me up and hope that some other story would come up, that the press or the media attention would die down, as it had done with Occupy several times. It was, if you remember, a pretty violent dance of trying to keep the media interested in any sort of messaging and not just a spectacle throughout Occupy Wall Street. And so I think the intent was to put me in here long enough to hope that the story dies. And I would be lying if I said that I wasn't afraid that as I near July 2nd, that if somebody somewhere would like to take on another 30 days to see if the story will die down, that there would be some effort to make sure that I remained here for the rest of the 90-day sentence. I am certainly aware and concerned, afraid of that possibility.
And what do you mentioned the aggressive prosecution of you in the case. What do you think, beyond Occupy, was many times in the case, people reported that it seemed somewhat personal between Zweibel and Choi. You could tell that there was a certain element that they really wanted this kind of conviction. Do you think that that was just because of Occupy, or do you think that those issues go deeper?
Oh, I have thought a lot about what happened in that courtroom alongside the quote, the personal is political. And this dichotomy of them so clearly trying to say that it wasn't a political trial, and the way that it was treated completely throughout the entire time as a political trial, but how personal the political trial was to them. I think it had a lot to do with Occupy. I think that it seems to me that there was a directive handed down from the top. I will go on record and say, well, so yes, he could have dropped this all along, so I'm going to point to him and say that last Occupy case, girl with no record, girl with no parking tickets, have nannied former President Carter's great-grandson, teacher certifications, like Queen of Nonviolence, as Yoni called me. You go after me for an elbow, for 2 to 7, it's obscene, it's absurd. And then, with Dwight Bell, as I understand it, he used to be a police litigator, that is what I've been told, or he had some representative association with the NYPD. Prior, since I've been in here, I've also done my research on Dwight Bell. I've met many a woman who has been treated very poorly, very harshly with Dwight Bell, and also watched him for 2.5 years in that courtroom be flabbergasted, honestly, by the rampant racism, calling young black men boy, by the sexism, don't you think you should be home with your children, the homophobia, refusing to switch to partner after somebody had already specified that they were in a same-sex marriage. And as far as Troy and Strain go, there's always woman on woman. Our society produces woman on woman hate. Honestly, the most astounding part of the trial probably should have been the complete and fair standard that Dwight Bell set for the trial, constantly citing, even before they objected, with Strain and Troy. But I kind of expected that. What was the most horrific thing was the blatant use of rape culture on behalf of DAs Troy and Strain.
And can you cite a specific example of that for the viewers?
For instance, I'm sitting there with a handprint like this, bruised with scratch marks, them insinuating that I must have done it myself because I'm not shy and I would not have failed to report that at the hospital. In fact, there's a lot that I haven't told about what happened to me at the hospital yet. A lot more that's a lot more horrific. The thing is generally speaking, when you're surrounded by police, handcuffed and decuffed to a bed where doctors come in, talk to your officer, and then leave without saying anything, then generally speaking, you realize that you're not really in a safe space to talk about anything that may or may not have happened to you. Generally speaking, also after you have what appears to have been a seizure, you're in a state of stress afterwards. You're completely discombobulated. You're trying to make up the pieces. The last thing that I remember is being slammed face first in the ground, waking up in a hospital bed with handcuffs. Why would the first thing that I talk about be my breast? Why was I arrested? Oh fuck, I'm in all green in a hospital and the last place I was at Zuccotti Park. What happened? Why am I here? It's on record the entire time that I have no memory of this elbow. And yet, this entire time, I'm being called a liar, a fake, a false victim. Because I didn't report the obvious handprint that was on my chest. I didn't need to. There was a handprint and scratch marks across my chest. I was handcuffed to a bed, sometimes not even in a hospital room. Sometimes in a storage closet.